Welcome to this deep dive. And we are taking a look today at Erich Fromm's The Art of Loving. And you shared some really interesting material with us. We've got the book itself, published back in 1956, and some background on this World Perspectives series that it's a part of.
Yeah, so Fromm's work, especially in The Art of Loving, it grapples with this timeless question. What does it actually mean to love?
And you're particularly interested in his idea of love as this active practice, not just like a feeling that you get. And that kind of goes against a lot of these like easy answer love guides that are out there.
Absolutely. Fromm actually, he hits that head on right in the foreword where he points out most people are like way more focused on being loved
Yeah,
than developing their capacity to love,
right.
you know?
It's like we want somebody to tell us how to get love rather than how to give it.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like we're looking for a shortcut or some like guaranteed formula, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do I receive love rather than master the art of actually giving it?
It's like we think that love will just magically appear if we follow the right steps or something like that.
Right.
But Fromm's saying that you don't get fulfillment in love from just passively receiving it.
Exactly. It comes from cultivating these qualities within ourselves. Things like humility, courage, faith, discipline.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because those aren't the things that people think of when they're like, oh, I want to experience love.
Right.
It's almost like they're character building blocks,
Exactly.
which is interesting because, I mean, Fromm's definitely challenging these conventional ideas about love. I mean, he just comes right out and asks, is love an art?
And of course he says yes. He believes that love requires both theory and practice, just like any art form.
So you can't just feel loving towards somebody.
Right.
You've got to study it. You've got to understand it. You've got to put in the work.
It's about going beyond just emotions, and really kind of cultivating a deeper understanding.
It's funny because he uses that analogy of medicine, right? You can't just read a textbook about the human body and be a great doctor.
Exactly, yeah.
You have to have the knowledge, but then you have to put it into practice. You've got to develop the intuition. You've got to actually care about the patients that you're working with.
Right.
It can't just be theoretical.
Exactly.
It's like you're bridging that gap between the theory and then actually putting it into practice.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of where this World Perspectives series context comes in. Because, this series, it aimed to re-examine these big ideas, democracy, freedom, justice,
Right.
and love in a world that was becoming increasingly materialistic, right?
And that's something that we see even more so today, right?
Totally, yeah.
Like everywhere you look,
Yeah.
it's like, buy this, achieve this. This is how you measure your success.
Yeah, you've got to have this, you've got to have that. This is what a successful person looks like,
Right. And it's so easy to get caught up in that.
Totally. And what the World Perspectives intro argues is that, like, this whole focus on the material stuff actually just makes a fundamental human problem. It makes it even worse.
Okay.
And that's the problem of separateness.
So when we talk about separateness in this context,
Yeah.
what does that actually mean?
So from right along with this World Perspectives text, they see this sense of separateness as like this root cause of anxiety, guilt, suffering, all this stuff.
It's that feeling of being alone.
Yeah, being isolated and disconnected.
Okay.
And love, they're saying, is like a potential answer to that.
Okay, so it's like an antidote to this feeling of being separate, of being alone.
Right.
But I'm guessing he's not saying just run out and find a relationship.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the World Perspectives intro, they outline 3 ways that people try to overcome this.
Okay.
So you've got orgiastic union.
Orgiastic union.
Yep. You've got herd conformity.
Okay.
And then creative activity.
Okay, so, I've got to admit, orgiastic union sounds a little intense.
It can be, yeah. So think of things like trance states, drug use, even certain sexual experiences.
Okay.
Like these are all about kind of achieving this temporary feeling of fusion.
Okay.
Like you get to escape the boundaries of your own identity, right?
So you're escaping from yourself almost.
Yeah, for a little bit, and then you've got to come back.
Yeah, so I guess that would offer some relief, but
It's short-lived.
right, it's not going to solve the
I'm
problem.
not dealing with the root of it, yeah.
Okay, so what about herd conformity then?
Right, so herd conformity,
Yeah,
that offers something a little more lasting, though it's kind of an illusion.
so that's like you join a group or you do what everybody else does just to fit in.
Yeah, exactly. And the text actually gives this interesting example of a Roman citizen
Okay.
who maybe he's poor, doesn't have a lot going on,
Yeah.
but he can say, civis Romanus sum.
I am a Roman citizen.
Exactly. And that gives him this sense of belonging. It's like belonging to something bigger than himself so he doesn't feel as separate. you know?
I can see that because we still see that today.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Like the way that people form groups and they get behind ideologies, and even just like the way we interact online.
Yeah.
It's all, I'm part of this group or I'm part of that
It's
group.
a need to belong, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so then what's this about creative activity?
Right. So creative activity, this is all about uniting with the world through what you create. So
Okay.
think of like an artist or a musician.
It's almost like they're bringing something from within themselves out into the world,
Exactly. Yeah, they're bridging that gap through what they create.
which I imagine is very fulfilling.
Yeah, totally. And the World Perspectives text, it makes the argument that, in a lot of modern jobs, especially industrial settings, that potential for creative union is stifled.
Because it's like factory work. You're just
Mm.
part of this big machine.
Right. You're just a cog in the machine. You're disconnected from the final product, from that sense of fulfillment you might get otherwise.
Right, so the very structure of our society is maybe contributing to that feeling of separateness.
Right. And it's something to think about, in your own life.
Yeah.
Where do you feel that connection?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so how does this all tie back into Fromm and what he was saying about love?
Right. So he's pulling a lot from this philosopher, Baruch Spinoza, who distinguished between active and passive emotions, or what Spinoza called affects.
Okay, I think I remember reading about that. It was like active emotions are driven by your own agency, your own power.
Exactly. And passive emotions, it's like you're being subjected to them. You're not in control.
Right. Okay.
And Fromm takes that idea and he applies it to love. He says, love, real love, it has to be active. It's an action.
It's not passive. It's not something that just happens to you.
Right, exactly. It's about consciously choosing to connect with another person.
So you're not just swept away by your emotions. You're making a deliberate effort.
Right. You're showing up. You want to understand the other person, care for them, respect them.
It's a choice.
Yes, absolutely. And this ties in with Fromm's emphasis on giving.
Because he talked a lot about how giving in a relationship, that's a really important part of love.
Right, but it's not just about the act of giving a physical gift. It's about giving of yourself, and that benefits both people in the relationship.
Right. It's about sharing who you are with another person.
Exactly. There's this great quote from Karl Marx. He said, "Man as man can exchange love only for love."
So it has to go both ways.
Yes, it's reciprocal. There has to be that mutual care and respect. Okay, so now let's get into Fromm's 4 types of love. He talks about brotherly love, motherly love, fatherly love, and self-love.
So he's really breaking love down into these different categories.
Right. He's trying to show that love isn't just this one thing. It can manifest in all these different ways. And they're not mutually exclusive either. It's not like you can only experience one type of love at a time.
And I'm really curious to hear more about this concept of brotherly love because Fromm calls that the most fundamental type of love.
Yeah, and he describes brotherly love as having these key elements: care, responsibility, respect, and a deep understanding of the other person. He's saying it's about recognizing that shared humanity.
So you're not focusing on your differences. It's more about recognizing that we're all connected on some level.
Yeah, like we're all in this together kind of thing. Fromm actually uses this term central relatedness to describe it.
Okay, so you're relating to that person on this very deep level.
Exactly. And then there's motherly love, which is a bit different.
And how so?
Well, motherly love is all about unconditional acceptance. It's about affirming a child's life and their needs no matter what.
Right. It's that unwavering love and support.
Exactly. And Fromm uses these really beautiful symbols to illustrate it. Milk and honey.
Oh, yeah. I love that part. It's like the milk represents that nurturing aspect, that life-giving quality of motherly love.
Yeah.
And then the honey is like the sweetness, the joy that comes with it.
Exactly. But Fromm also points out that even motherly love can have its downsides. There's that potential for the mother to become possessive or overly anxious.
It's hard to find that balance, right?
It is. It's this dance between wanting to protect your child and also giving them the space to grow and become their own person.
Right, because you don't want to stifle them. And that kind of leads us into fatherly love, which, if I remember correctly, Fromm contrasts with motherly love because it's conditional.
Exactly. Fatherly love comes with expectations. It's about instilling principles and structure in a child's life. It's about guidance.
So it's more about pushing the child to achieve and reach their full potential.
Exactly. And while that can be really motivating for some kids, it can also lead to problems if those expectations aren't met.
Right, because then the child might feel like their father's love is dependent on their accomplishments.
Exactly. And that can be a slippery slope. It's all about finding that balance between setting healthy boundaries and making sure the child still feels loved unconditionally.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that there's always two sides to everything. And even love can have these kind of darker aspects to it.
Right.
And speaking of different sides of love, we should probably talk about self-love, because that's something that Fromm talks about. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that. Like, they think self-love is selfish.
Yeah, and he really pushes back on that. He says, like, you can't truly love somebody else unless you love yourself.
Right. It's like, how can you give something that you don't have?
Exactly. Yeah.
If you don't have love for yourself, how can you possibly love another person?
And it goes back to that active practice.
Yeah.
It's something you're cultivating within yourself first.
Right. So he doesn't, like, give you the step-by-step guide to love, but he does talk about these important qualities for really mastering it,
It
right?
does.
And we touched on these a bit earlier. We talked about humility and courage, discipline.
Yeah, yeah.
But he also talks about concentration, patience, just this willingness to really see ourselves and to see other people.
And to be honest with ourselves about what we see.
Yes, exactly.
He even talks about becoming more aware of our own, like, physical and mental processes.
Really?
Yeah, like notice your own patterns, your defense mechanisms, all those things that might be getting in the way.
It's like you have to know yourself before you can really, truly know somebody else.
Exactly, yeah. And that actually reminds me of this quote that you shared from Paracelsus. It says, "He who knows nothing loves nothing. He who can do nothing understands nothing. He who understands nothing is worthless. But he who understands also loves, notices, sees. The more knowledge is inherent in a thing, the greater the love. Anyone who imagines that all fruits ripen at the same time as the strawberries knows nothing about grapes."
And I think that applies so well here, because it's like we can't love something that we don't take the time to understand, to really
Yeah.
get to know.
Yeah.
And that requires patience. It requires observation,
Yeah.
and requires a willingness to learn from what we observe, right?
Right, because we can learn so much just by paying attention.
Yeah, and it's like you were saying, each type of love requires its own skills,
Right.
its own way of understanding.
It's not one size fits all, that's for sure.
So given everything we've talked about today with Fromm's work,
Mhm.
I mean, he leaves us with this really interesting question. And it's this: can love really thrive in a society that's driven by, these capitalist ideals where it's all about individual success, material wealth? Like, is there even space for that deeper connection?
Yeah, and it's a question that I don't think there's an easy answer,
Right.
but it's something to think about as you're reading The Art of Loving.
Absolutely.
Like, how does that tension play out in your own life, in your own relationships?
Oh, what are you noticing?
Yeah, what resonates with you?
Exactly. Well, on that note, thank you so much for diving into this with me. It's been a fascinating conversation.
It really has. Thanks for having me.